medically understood.
Hey there, folks. Mark Edwards here. And this is the Ultraviolet Podcast. And today is a very special episode. I have not one, not two, but three really awesome guests. We did kind of a panel situation. Today I'm joined by Dr. Caitlin Green, Bellamy Rhea, and FintasticMrFox. And we all got together to talk about the current rise of, well, fascism in America. Specifically fascism as it's arising via the vector of misogyny, transphobia, transmisogyny, racism, and all of these various wedge issues and entry points that are being used to separate people from their comrades politically. I wanted to get a bunch of people together who are directly materially impacted by the most recent rash of these rulings, be it abortion, be it the hundreds of anti-trans laws that have gone into effect in America. And as Bellamy rightly points out very quickly, everyone is materially and directly affected by fascism. But if you are someone who looks like me and goes through the world like I do, it can seem like it's not something that's going to impact you directly. But I promise you it will. Not just you personally, but someone you care for, someone you love will be impacted by these things. And so I wanted to have this discussion amongst this particular group of wonderful people who I really respect and whose opinions I value. And I think it was a fantastic conversation. It's one of the best podcasts I think I've ever been party to. Unfortunately, we recorded it about 2 days before the Supreme Court did what we all kind of knew it was going to inevitably do, which is overturn the Roe v. Wade decision. So as we're having this conversation, that looming threat is sort of in the background, and it's not as present in our minds, or at least in the conversation, it's not as present as it would have been had we recorded it today, as I'm recording this introduction. Had we recorded this podcast maybe like a day or two later, we would have had some different conversation topics, but as it is, I think it's still a very important conversation to have, because what we ultimately wind up touching on is how people get radicalized, the way that young people are turned towards this, vicious, monstrous political cesspool that strips the rights from people as a matter of course. And that's a very important conversation to have. That said, I do understand that given the nature of the way things have moved politically and the rapidity with which they've moved politically in America, people might be more interested in some sort of like meat and potatoes stuff. So I want to foreground this conversation that I'm about to present you with a couple of links that are going to be in the show notes that are for people who want to know what they can do and what the situation actually is. The first of these is going to be a link to a discussion had between the Red Planet crew, which is Sophie from Mars, Conquest of Dread, DJ Mule on their show, with Anansi's Library, who is a wonderful anarchist YouTuber that I encourage everybody to go subscribe to. And they had Anansi on, and Anansi described their experiences as a protester and an organizer during the George Floyd protests. And they discuss protest tactics, protest strategies. And I would encourage everybody who's thinking about going out to go watch that video. And if there's one single takeaway from it that you do, it is don't get fucking kettled. If you don't know what being kettled means, go watch the video. You will find it very enlightening. And it's something that I think is required viewing for anybody who's about to go out and potentially interact with the police over this issue. The next link that I'm going to give you is a research document kind of thing. It's a Google Doc put together by the Twitter user Prison Culture. And it basically describes what the Roe v. Wade decision will mean right now, like what its actual legal ramifications are. And then it gives practical advice for people who want to get involved right now and what you can actually go do. Specifically, don't go out and try and reinvent the wheel to create like mutual aid networks. They're already out there. They already exist. There's already almost certainly somebody doing the things that you want to do somewhere near you that can help you get plugged in, and you just got to find them. And that's a really good document that lists a bunch of resources to help you do that. And I would highly encourage you to go out and check that out. The other main link that I'll point you to is a thread that I did on Twitter, which contains links to videos that teach you how to do the basics of first aid. So stop the bleed courses, how to do continuous compression CPR, how to build an IFAC, how to manage a C-spine injury or a pelvic fracture for somebody who's been hit by a vehicle, that kind of thing, the sort of practical stuff that you are likely to encounter in like a worst case scenario in a protest or direct action. I have been wanting and planning to put together a series of videos where I use my experience as a paramedic to go through like all the details and the coarse grain, 1,000-yard view and fine grain details of like how to practically do this stuff. But I just haven't had the time. My life has been kind of turned upside down recently. I've got a lot of things happening around me that are deeply unfortunate and difficult to navigate. And I just haven't had the time. Like I've got all the, like right here over in the corner is like my mannequins and like trainer tourniquets and stuff for filming this stuff. And I just haven't been able to sit down and do it. But I don't want that to stop anybody from getting this information. So that thread is a collection of videos that I think do a decent enough job. Not as good as I would do, but decent enough, with the exception of the IAF's articles. Those are just absolutely fantastic. Go follow them on Twitter if you haven't already. But the rest of them are okay, and they're good enough if you want to learn how to do a tourniquet or pack a wound or things like that. So it's the best I can do right now, and that's what I would encourage you to check out. So Anansi's appearance on Red Planet, Prison Culture's document on what the situation is and what to do, and then the videos and articles that I've posted about how to manage acute life-threatening injuries and eye irrigation and wound irrigation and things like that. So go check those out if you want to get involved. And I wish you the best of luck out there for everybody who is fighting for their rights and freedoms right now. People who are capable of giving birth, to our trans comrades, to everybody else on the LGBTQAI plus spectrum who's on the chopping block right now and has been for a very long time, to our comrades of color who are almost certainly going to be negatively impacted by all of this, and then some if some of the things that are in that opinion piece are actually moved on. Yeah, it's a very dark time, but I want to be productive, and that's ultimately why I reached out to these friends to have this conversation publicly. And I want to give you things that you can do that are positive and helpful, and hopefully this conversation will also be positive and helpful for you. So yeah, that's all the housekeeping and stuff up front I have. One other thing. After recording, we realized, or Caitlin realized, that an anecdote that she told about a young man that she personally knows, the way that relationship was described is not something that is good for her in terms of her like personal security to have out in the internet. But we couldn't really just cut that whole section because it spawned a lot of conversation, and various people refer back to that anecdote either obliquely or directly. And so the solution that we came up with was just to bleep out anytime the nature of the relationship that this person has to Caitlin is mentioned. So if you hear that in the show, that's what's going on there. To any future guests or anybody who is listening, I am always absolutely 100% happy to accommodate anybody's security needs or personal needs when it comes to video, audio, anecdote, any of that stuff. It's one of the reasons I record these offline, is so we can have that like breather period where people get to think, oh, I'm not actually comfortable with that. And then we can address it before it goes to air. So I just wanted to let you know that that's what was happening. Yeah, that's pretty much it. As far as content warnings, it's a conversation about fascism and racism and misogyny and transphobia and transmisogyny, and we hit all the big ones. If any of those things, particularly right now, if frank discussions about the internal workings of the brains of the people who want you and yours to not exist anymore, is going to cause you psychic damage, then I totally understand that. And I'm not going to take it personally if you shut this video off right now, but I would still encourage you to check out those links. And with all that having been said, I wish you the best of luck. I hope that you're able to weather this storm, and we are all in this together, and solidarity forever. Without any further delay, I give you Bellamy Rhea, Mr. Fox, Fantastic Mr. Fox, and Dr. Caitlin Green. I am so bad with cold opens, but we'll power through and struggle. Thank you, all of you, for joining me. I'm really happy to have you here. I thought we'd start by just kind of doing a round robin introduction. Tell everybody about yourself, where you come from, kind of what you do online, and then we'd go from there. And I guess we'll go from this side of my screen to the other. So we'll start with Bellamy.
Oh God, I'm first. Oh no. You've doomed us all, my friend. Now I have to adjust my microphone so I can sit like a gay kid. Well, so my name is Bellamy Rhea. I am a PhD student at Temple University. It would be difficult for me to define my research area, but I think that's probably typical with most PhD students at the section where I am. But I sometimes make video essays. They take a good amount of time because I am unnecessarily meticulous about what I do. And I'm also a fiction writer to be.
Nice. And Finn?
Yes, I am FintasticMrFox. I am a Canadian personal trainer. I'm also a trans man who talks about his experiences and various other topics on YouTube. And I don't really have that much to contribute that's very exciting. That's pretty much it. I have a dog who's really cool, and yeah, that's about it.
We love the doggo. And
yeah, he's great.
Caitlin, Dr. Green.
Hey, yeah, I'm Caitlin. I'm a linguist, and I work on discourse, which is like the structuring and choosing of language in order to create a message. So I started out looking at discourses about what kinds of people are natural programmers in computer science classes. And then after I finished my PhD, I got more focused on general kind of social justice issues and how people justify the rolling back of human rights.
Okay. And yeah, thanks. Thanks everybody for being here again. The main reason I got all of y'all together is because you're all awesome, and everybody should go out and follow you on the social media. The links will be in the down there part. But basically, we are currently in a clusterfuck of a bad situation in America in particular, but in the Anglosphere more broadly, where fascism is accelerating, and it is using transphobia and misogyny and just bigotry in general to wedge itself into the public discourse, into the mainstream. And that is having materially negative effects on huge swaths of our population, from anti-trans laws to now they're at this point going after drag shows to obviously the coming after Roe v. Wade and abortion rights. And I wanted to get some people in the room who are all materially affected by these things to have a conversation about this and kind of where you think we are, how you think we got here, and what you think we should do going forward. And by we, I mean in particular what you think people who are not materially affected by it, like myself and probably a lot of my audience, should do. And I'm just going to kind of hopefully turn it over to y'all and let y'all have a conversation about this, because I think that would be the most productive way. I don't have a lot to say for myself in this. This is an issue that affects y'all directly.
Well, I guess I would offer, like, just, I don't believe in, like, correcting people, and I'm not really so much a criticizer anymore, although I think Twitter kind of demands such a thing from your thumbs and your other fingers occasionally. But I would say that there is no one that is not material affected by fascism. There are those of us that are its immediate and direct targets, but I would say that there's no such thing as fascism that doesn't touch you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, that's totally fair. I suppose my main point is that it's being used as a wedge issue, but yeah, ultimately it's going to affect everybody. There are people who look like me who think it won't affect them and who are willing to throw people under the bus as long as they continue to think that it won't affect them. And that is a huge fucking problem. And
even
that's
putting yourself aside, you've got loved ones, you've got friends who are directly targeted.
Yeah, absolutely.
Not to go immediately into alarmist territory, but when it comes to fascism, it's not a question of whether or not you'll be on the chopping block, it's when.
Yes.
Like,
well, that's so. All right. Well, I guess if we're just going to like jump into the conversation, Finn, something that you said, actually, what you just said is, I think, a major point that really needs to be engaged with and understood, especially when it comes to whiteness, because there's a lot of like popular theory out there, I think, and there's like a general understanding of whiteness like as a race. And I tend to make the argument that white is a class, and it's a class that can be divested from. You can separate yourself from it, even if you're someone that is coded, like the three of you are, as white in like everyday society. Doing so is complicated, and how to do so, I don't have all of the answers for. I'll frequently tell you that I'm wrong because it's true. But so one of the like major ways that whiteness functions is it takes and subsumes and uses what is useful, and will immediately drop anything that is no longer as such. It's actually, I'm realizing now, because I was thinking about racial capitalism now, I'm realizing that whiteness and capitalism essentially function the same way. So that's to say that today you might be white or close to white, and then tomorrow you may not be. Clarence Thomas, it would be controversial for me to call him white passing, so just know that I'm not actually doing that. But Clarence Thomas has sat at the levers of the power, at levers of power for whiteness, and others make credible arguments that he is like the most virulent fascist on the Supreme Court. And I'm not really inclined to disagree with that. I think him and Alito are kind of vying for that position. But I promise you that man is sat across the table from Mitch McConnell and planned out what to do. So whiteness is like, it's this really like nebulous thing that will make use of you. But I mean, Clarence, I'm sure. So you're not listening to this, but if you happen to hear this, my friend, it is very likely that you will die comfortable, because your days are certainly numbered merely by age. Violence is bad. People don't do that. But the moment he stops being useful, like if tomorrow people like me, black people, were to be put up against the wall, Clarence Thomas would not be excluded.
Yeah, that's right. There's a real danger in being one of the good ones, because that has a time limit.
Mm.
For sure. I've, white women also, we love to be one of the good ones. We just love to like cozy up to patriarchy and be the cool one who doesn't believe women or who doesn't fight for other marginalized people. And that's not going to work for us forever.
That's actually been something, and these are things that I've been unpacking as I develop as a person in general, like someone who wants to grow and learn and just be better and do better. But transitioning, the experience of that has given me a far more obviously, like a more blatant understanding of how these structures really work, because I went from not having privilege to having very obvious privilege when I transitioned from being perceived as a woman to being the man that I am and living as such. And obviously that, and I went through when I was an adolescent, I was very young, but I went through that, like not a feminist, not like other girls, like all of that stuff. And, I made that joke in, I think, my last video that, well, yeah, I'm not, because I'm a man, but it has given me a better understanding of my whiteness. As soon as like my maleness started becoming apparent and started really becoming something that I could benefit from in certain situations and being able to see where those lines are, it was like, oh, okay, how can I look for these lines in other places? And just everything that you were saying, Bellamy, about whiteness as a class, and sort of like separating yourself from it, it's helped with that. Obviously, I have more work to do, but it's been really interesting seeing how I can apply this, not having privilege and then suddenly having it, to now looking for areas that I've perhaps always had it and wasn't aware of that. And
I'm sorry, go ahead, dear.
Oh, sorry. Just to get back to what Mark was kind of prompting us on. Hopefully that makes sense. But when it comes to like things that people can do, who are outside of these communities that are just not to be morbid, but first on the chopping block, that's something that you can do. You can look for those lines. You can look for where those benefits are happening.
I mean, I don't know if it's morbid so much as it's just the recognition of reality. Reality cares not about our feelings for its presence, but the thing that I like to give, and I want to try and transition this like in, so we'll see if it works. I have the thought now, but we'll see if ADD brain holds on to it for the duration of what I have to say. But the example that I like to give of this concept, like actually happening, because I think it can be hard for people to conceptualize things like without like specific case studies. But the example I like to give, so there's a battalion, I forget the actual name of the battalion, but there was a battalion of Polish soldiers in Haiti. Napoleon sent them there to put down the uprising of enslaved people. And I am careful to say enslaved people. They weren't slaves, they were people who were enslaved. But this particular group of Polish soldiers got there, looked around and said, this is fucked. I don't want to kill these people. And then turned their guns against the army they were supposed to be serving. And when Haiti won its independence, these individuals were essentially declared ethnically black by the Haitians there and welcome into their society. They've had children with black people present. So, I mean, Haiti has a range of like skin tone expressions. So, this is just like a thing, but their white appearance essentially more or less died with them because, it was their genes, I guess, were integrated into the populations there, but they were declared ethnically black because so I don't like the term ally, I like the term accomplice. And they said, well, this is a thing that's happening and I have two choices. I can kill these people as I'm instructed to do, or I can listen to what my brain is telling me, to what my heart is telling me, although those two are the same thing, and to turn my guns against their oppressor. And they did. And I don't want to say they were rewarded for it, but they're welcoming into society as members of that society, specifically that belonged, was because of that. And that's what I mean when I say that whiteness is a political class that can be divested from. You can choose not to do white shit, essentially.
I think
within reason, but yeah.
Yeah. I think the ally accomplice distinction is really important, because what we need to be doing is looking for our opportunities to act and to cause trouble for, the system that is causing so much pain. And so it's got to be active, and it's got to be creative, and it's got to be kind of proactive, so that you really are finding for yourself those opportunities. And, I recently tweeted that, I don't always have a lot that I can do with my physical body, because I am a breastfeeding parent. And I am I have some help, but not a lot of help. So a lot of times I literally have a newborn strapped to me. But something I can do is donate to people that I know are doing good work, and write words that I think will have an impact on people. I can do both of those things from my house. So, you have to find your opportunities where you can find them.
I don't think many people realize the power of just writing letters. Mm-hmm. Like writing letters to politicians, to members of parliament, actually, showing that there is, because nobody cares about statistics. I shouldn't say that. Statisticians care about statistics. I care about statistics. Most of us here care, but the general population, you'd be hard pressed to find people who really care about the numbers. It's a matter of, what do I think is true? What makes sense to me? And the way to change people's minds there isn't to show them the numbers, it's to show them the voices. It's to show them all of the many, many people, and the fact that they are making themselves a social outcast by not being on the side of human rights. And so for allies, or accomplices rather, I do really like that terminology. For them to just take that time and put their voices out there and be open and be clear and be honest about the fact that, yes, I am in favor of human rights. Yes, I am behind these movements. That alone does wonders.
Yeah.
This government really operates mainly off of vibes. Like, they are not terribly interested in the numbers. You can tell basically any policy you want to look at. But like, personally, recently, I had to deal with this with the COVID vaccinations for kids under 5, right? I have 2 kids under 5. I was, watching this with a lot of personal interest. And the way that they talked, it was like they clearly didn't have even a passing acquaintance with a sociologist or a social scientist at all, right? Because they were just like, oh, well, if we fast forward this too much, then like we won't really get enough uptake. And it's like, what if you surveyed some people? Like, what if you tried to find out? Because one of the things that has happened is that because it took so long, a bunch of people were like, there must be something really wrong with these vaccines, because they just could not get it through. And then on the other hand, people who weren't paying attention at all don't realize how long it took and went, this is way too fast. Why are they going so fast? Right? So they're just like terrified of the reactions of people whose attitude they haven't even measured.
It's the incredible irony of the facts don't care about your feelings people running an entire country on our feelings just aren't going to factor in the facts.
Yeah.
So actually, all right, we're in my realm. I guess if I
Nice.
define a realm of research, it is emotion, fundamentally emotion.
Nice.
So if we're talking about, at least, so I guess to answer your prompt, Mark, and to shift toward what, I'm sorry, I have cat fur that I'm like trying to keep out of my lipstick. If we're answering the question of what makes fascism a thing, it is that. We tend to think that facts matter, and like they do, but fundamentally, when it comes down to people making decisions, when it comes to like ideological leanings, this is all emotional. Like across the board, it is emotional. The things that make people a fascist are emotional. The things that make us, that have brought us to our ideologies, are emotional. And they have to be, because, like, so I'm not going to go too far into it, but a lot of research suggests that, I say a lot of research, that's kind of like meaningless. How do I phrase this? The research that I've been reading suggests that there's no separation between what we would term our mind and what we would term our bodies. So that would mean that when we're thinking, we're feeling, we're doing both of these things at the same time. They are essentially the same thing. If you read through feminist literature, they're saying this and have been saying this for a very long time. So if you're trying to figure out what makes someone a fascist, it is fundamentally the emotional appeals. If you've ever read fascist propaganda, it is exactly that. There's a term called positioning in propaganda. Well, not in propaganda, but in the research. And this term is a means of, so what it does is it takes a person and it shifts their reality and their perception of self. It positions them as someone that is primed to receive the message of the propaganda. So what it'll do is it'll take a person. It's very effective for white men because that's who it's victimizing. A lot of this propaganda is victimizing white men. So what it'll do is it'll position the white man as the victim. So now the victim feels fear. Then it'll shame them. Shame is actually, there's a lot more research that I'm starting to read that's present in the importance of shame as an emotion in our motivations. But there's a feeling of shame after the feeling of fear. They say, well, your daughters are being this, your wives, they're being that. You are in danger, essentially. And then it says that it is your fault because you are doing nothing about it. And then immediately after that, it'll say, join us and stop this. And there's this like progression of emotion that's present in a lot of propaganda. The study that I read specifically examined propaganda in Sweden. And it goes from that fear response to the shame response. And then it offers you hope and pride. And it gives you the option to like do something about it. So if we're talking about like what gets someone to that point, it is fundamentally that. It is those it's recognizing driving emotions and pushing those buttons very carefully to create a person that would do what we're seeing out here. And to do so, to potentially play into Caitlin, to do so and to give them a means of justifying it.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the channels, the streams of information that I monitor is like tactical influencers, like military bros whose entire business model is essentially fascist propaganda, but for personal profit. And it just so happens to function as that pipeline, and everything that you just said is present within that YouTube sphere and the whole community. So yeah, I have witnessed that, not within the research, but within the dog shit sphere of the internet that I stalk.
Yeah. Well, and it makes sense that it's very focused on gender and sexuality, even including when it's about race too. It's also often about sexuality, right? Because it's about an insecurity, a feeling of lack of control, which is sort of filtered through concern for children, concern for women, right? And so it's, they're doing this to your children, they're doing this to your wives, they're doing this to your women. You need to do something about it. And they're getting away with it because they're big and they're, animalistic and they're hypersexualized and they're voracious and they're just going to they're going to come through your town in like roving gangs of rapists or whatever, and they're going to get you and they're going to get your children and your wives. And so it's because you're small and weak and you're not stepping up that it's happening. So you better move and find a community of other people who are able to cause violence to the people who are doing this to your children and your women.
Yeah, I'm actually, because I know, Finn, you've spent a lot of time publicly talking about masculinity and like what it's like to navigate that in the world today, which is what initially attracted me to your content. And big ups to FD, who also does a lot of that. Everybody should go check out.
He's such a sweetie.
But I'm curious what your thoughts are on that specific vector of attack, fascism shaming young men into essentially being tools for that system. Like, what are your thoughts on that?
I think it's very much capitalizing on young men's lack of identity and lack of direction a lot of the time. They really are, and this is like, I'm going to be all over the place here, but this is something that I have noticed on such a nebulous term, but the left is there's a lot of critiques of masculinity. There's not a whole lot of here is an alternative. Here is a way that masculinity can manifest where you can feel some agency and some power. And so these guys are seeking identity. They're seeking power. They are seeking an outlet, and they're going to go with the person who gives them that. And I think that this is an area that we're kind of failing, because you now have these just what Caitlin was talking about, these young men going around and they're protecting women and children, and they're harassing women and children. They are aggressive and they are dangerous, and they are storming these like family events for children and like queer families and stuff. And they are actively hurting people. And they're doing this because somebody gave them the idea that this is how they can help people. This is how they can feel powerful. And I think that, like, really the thing that we're missing is something that helps these guys feel involved, that helps them feel strong. And I had another thing, but it's a train of thought derailed.
Yeah. Let me just, as a white woman, say, I don't need you to take your assault weapons and come into my library. I don't need that. Like, you don't need to do that for me. Thank you. But no.
Okay. But it's true. I mean, yeah. As a non-white woman, as a Black Japanese woman, please don't. We don't. It's not necessary. There's just books. Just read the books and play with the toys. Your libraries are wonderful. Do that.
As a white dude who owns one of those rifles, don't do it. It's cringe. It's just, regardless of all other safety considerations, people are going to make fun of you because they should.
So, all right. So that's actually, I'm glad that you said that too. Because Finn, you said something. And so there's a concept that I've discovered in the literature. And it's why I say I'm not, especially like when I'm writing academic stuff, I don't criticize so much anymore. The concept is called reading with. So instead of criticizing like the white supremacist literature or anything like that, you read it to understand what it does, essentially. You're not necessarily like, you're not empathizing with it in the sense that you're like, this is valid, because like, no. But you're empathizing with it as a means of understanding what it would do to a human being who accepts its message. So one of the things you are articulating, Finn, and actually I learned this when I started actually like listening to the white people in my life talk about being white, and you just articulated yourself, and so doing that reading with thing, it's specifically the lack of identity and in terms of like culture that I think is extremely meaningful and like pivotal in establishing fascism. Like if you look at fascism in Germany or wherever else, it does this thing where it just like cobbles together a culture from a bunch of cultures that have absolutely nothing to do with each other, from like the swastika to like, I don't know if it's called like Buddhist mysticism or something like that, but it takes all of this stuff and just slaps it on top of each other. Like I think the Black Sun, or no, the Chaos Star, took from something that was like a fictional thing, I think, that was like actually anti-fascist, and then decided to use it. So that lack of identity in whiteness, because like whiteness functions as, so I said this in my first video and I plan to engage with it significantly more in my next video, but whiteness is like, it's erasure. That's how it works. It empties everything out of you and leaves nothing at hand. So if you ask a white person, like, what is white culture? You ask anybody what is white culture, they have a very hard time defining that. Whereas you say, what is black culture? There's something of substance there. You might not be able to put it in words, but it is identifiable. So the thing that I like to say to white people is to ask yourself, what has whiteness removed from you? I discovered this from an actual like Caucasian man. And I mean a Caucasian man from like Caucasus. I'm not talking like weird American Caucasian. I mean like man who lived in a place called Caucasus, right? And then, you know, the Soviet Union and Germany did really horrible shit to these people on both ends. And he came here and he's like, yeah, I'm Caucasian. And in my like weird, like so-called American brain, I'm thinking, what the fuck are you talking about? And this dude shows up with like the most delicious fucking bread. He has a language. He has like an identifiable culture. But the second he steps on American soil, the second he becomes a part of the so-called Western world, all of that's gone. And it's replaced with this nebulous concept of whiteness. So I ask people, like, even all of you, I'm not saying that you should answer this question now, but like, what has it emptied out from you? Is your culture geographic? Because it may be. Appalachian culture is a thing. Southern culture is a thing. Louisiana has a culture. New Orleans has a culture. Or New Orleans, excuse me. So that I think that's really like foundational to fascism.
So in linguistics and especially in discourse, we have something called the unmarked case. So there's things that are marked and things that are unmarked. And it's essentially what's the default state and what's the special state. And this is a great example. Whiteness is constructed as being unmarked, being the neutral way to be. And then everything else is, there's something additive. So when you say, I can't think of anything for white culture, like that's why, is because we've built it up as this thing that's neutral, that's basic, that's like, this is just the normal way for people to be. And then anything else is like normal plus, or, you know, depending who you are, normal minus, right? White people, but like lacking in something. So that's what happens is we learn ourselves to be the neutral kind of person. And so that kind of eliminates our possibility of imagining that there's anything distinctive about us. And then the other thing is, you know, there's just so many of us. You can't take all of, even just like the United States, you can't take all the white people in the United States and be like, oh yeah, they've got a lot in common, except for the way that they're racialized.
That's just everything being talked about here. Something that I've noticed in particularly like, you know, young white men is it, excuse me, it comes down to that, like, look at the reaction to Miss Marvel, for example, about a young, I believe is she, it's been forever since I read Miss Marvel, Pakistani girl, I mean, American from a Pakistani family, and just the vitriol from some of these guys, the way that these like white dude Star Wars fans respond. My next video is actually on the way these guys reacted when there was a hint that maybe Batman could possibly not be completely heterosexual, and they just lost it. And it's this whole, because they don't have an identity, because, you know, there's no culture for them, they pick them. They have their geek cultures. This is like their fandoms are where they put their identity. And so when anyone else, you know, uses this fantasy world to tell their own story, it's a threat to that identity. It's something that feels like it's being taken away from them.
Yeah. We're back to my dissertation, nerd masculinity. Yeah.
Ooh, really? Ooh,
yeah.
I want to hear more about that.
Yeah. I mean, okay. So I grew up in a family of nerds. Like, you don't produce this person without having some nerds around. So it was always of interest to me, right? And so I wrote about computer science education and how it interacts with nerd culture and nerd masculinity. And part of it is about like, this is our thing. We made it because we didn't have anything. And so if anybody tries to touch it who doesn't look and act just like me, I'm feeling attacked. and I need to like fight back. And we're seeing an even bigger backlash right now in the tech space, where there's people explicitly saying like we need to be discouraging people, women especially, but Black and Latino people also. Like we need to stop them from colonizing tech because it belongs to us. And they're like
Christ.
recruiting all this terrible like pseudoscience about like their brains just don't work as good, like they're not as good at this stuff. They should be doing like humanities because that's where their brains are like more suited, that kind of thing. Oh, I know.
I swear to God, I can't remember where I heard this from, and it's obviously very reductive, but the Nazis were what happens if you give Gamergate a fucking army. Like it's just.
I mean, not wrong.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, being reductive, yeah, sure, but like not wrong. Like how much of like Nazi Germany is like you hear them having to articulate like a foundational identity.
Mm-hmm.
I think it is like Lebensraum. I'm not sure how you say that, but like
living space. Yeah.
Talking about like giving people something to like cling to, and it's one of the things that like I think people tend to shy away from identity and toward class politics, and I don't have like significant amounts of smoke for those folks because I don't think that's an unreasonable way to go. But like the more I look at this stuff, the more I think that it is fundamentally about like identity, about who you think you are, and not identity merely in the space of like racial, gender and sexual markers, but from top to bottom, like how you conceptualize yourself, I think is like one of the most important, if not like the most important thing.
When we're teaching sociolinguistics, we have to teach about identity because it's it's a category of variables that greatly impacts your language. And one of the things that we really have to hammer home for the students is identity is not just the stuff that people who cry about identity politics thinks that it is, right? Like I have a lot of identities that I consider to be mine, like being a parent is one of them. Being a nerd. I already called myself a nerd, right? That's part of it. Being a language person, being a music person, like these are all identities that I claim for myself. And I go around the world acting like I am that kind of person because that's what I think of myself. And other people will treat me with varying degrees of acceptance of those things about myself. And that's how identity works. It's not just like, do you tick this box on the census or whatever?
That kind of, not to like go way back, but to take it back to the masculinity thing specifically, I think that one of the things that's really sad about this pattern of these young men being radicalized by, these, I guess, various power figures above them is that they like to think of themselves as strong. They mobilize in this way so that they can feel powerful, so that they can feel strong. But there is so much more strength in defining your own identity and having all of, just what you were talking about, being a nerd and all of these different things that you can kind of cultivate to inform that image of who you are. These young men have so much power over what that could look like, but instead they're choosing to follow orders from other people. And it's very complicated. It's very, very complicated. It is. Radicalization is a very complex thing, but there is a fair amount of choice within it. And I think that there's a lot of power to be had just in recognizing that and making a different one.
Mm-hmm. It's like this, one of the things that I've been trying to like really engage with is kind of the idea of like self-actualization, right? Like becoming, or at least trending toward the person that you want to be. With, at least for me personally, with the understanding that I'm never actually going to be an idealized version of myself in my head. I'm always going to be trying to become that person, and that's okay because it motivates my actions to being like better, so to speak. doing things that make me this or make me that or make me feel like this sort of person or like that sort of person. And it's so FD talked about this, I think, in a couple of videos ago. If we're mentioning him again, and real quick,
Always feel free.
I do like him a lot. He's a very sweet man. But I looked this up. So they're CDC statistics, so take them with a grain of salt. But according to the CDC, at least in the United States, well, so-called United States, between 1999 and 2017, the second highest rate of suicide is among white men with what they're defining as American Indian or Alaskan Native as the highest rate. And to me, so I didn't go to school with other black people. Like, I had some black people and we all sat at the same lunch table because we're around a bunch of fucking white people. But the lamenting that was present among white boys, especially in that school, was of a completely different flavor than the lamenting that I heard from my brothers and the other black boys that I grew up around where my mother lived. And on one hand, the lamenting from black boys was specifically about like the actual despair, like that they're dealing with in that moment, like articulating social problems that lead to higher deaths among black people, incarceration, losing friends and family and things like that. But the lamenting that I would hear among white men was this sort of like almost like a lack of personhood, if I had to pick something. And that's not to be woe is white men, but when I say fascism hurts everyone, it's because all of like the things that make up fascism do hurt everyone. Patriarchy is really fucking shitty for men. I'm sorry, like it is. So talking about myself and myself only to the other trans people listening, as a former man, it sucked. I did not like it. It still sucks, but it just sucks differently now.
There's
Racism
a lack
sucks.
of community there.
Yeah, you're like this. I don't want to call them uniquely atomized because I don't like prioritizing. But there's this like atomized sense of being that's present among like white men that I just have not seen among other people.
Yeah.
Because there's this like lack of like, you don't know who to be almost.
Mm-hmm. And there's a lack of safety also to be yourself because so who's college age, he's as white as I am. And, and he has expressed these really serious concerns about failing to be able to find closeness with other boys, and the fear and the anxiety around, trying to get close to someone and be vulnerable with somebody and being rejected because that's not the right way to be a white boy in the United States. Like, he felt really lonely about that. And it just hurt because one of the things that I could always fall on as a person who's perceived as quite feminine is emotional vulnerability. When I need somebody to take care of me emotionally, there's someone I can turn to and just lay it all out there. But there's a real danger if you're a guy in the patriarchy in that, because you can get really rejected and even hurt.
So the thing that Bellamy said earlier about whiteness emptying you, I think is very apt to this, because whiteness does empty you. It strips you of anything that is not just this gray neutrality upon which capitalism can assert itself. And then that creates this very fertile ground for fascism, which cobbles together this identity for you. And so capitalism and whiteness as a construct and fascism, which is wrapped up in all that, is deeply invested in making sure that young white men are miserable and don't have identities that they can wrap themselves up in and have no sense of community because that's their recruitment pool. So
Yes.
I think varying levels of intentionality exist there. A lot of it's systemic, but like that is the system as I see it when it comes to generating that misery.
Yeah.
It's the complicated flip side of that whole like cis white heterosexual man is the default human. It's like, opening up your character customization screen and not getting to add anything. That's it. And so that's a difficult conversation to have because, there are so many benefits to being considered across like a very broad culture, the default human, right? Like this has obvious privilege with it. And this again goes back to that talking about the problem, not really offering a solution, not really acknowledging the flip side of it. And it is that whole, you don't want to be all like, oh, won't somebody think of the white man? But to a certain extent, we kind of should, we kind of have to. Because, I mean, on the one hand, these are human beings who are also experiencing, just intersectionality and the way that the world works and how complicated existing as a person is. But also, this position that they're in is what is letting them be radicalized and letting them hurt us. So it is both in our best interest and their best interest to talk about this and to sort of like address the problem of how it would feel personally to be considered the quote unquote default person. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, it does because so I have to figure out how to phrase this because I don't want to come across as if I'm yelling at people because I don't believe in doing that. There's this like default, like we think that we're doing like a necessary thing by telling which people are white and which people they are not white, essentially things like that. And it's something that I have personal experience with because I have some supposed biological inheritance of whiteness. I don't claim it because I've never experienced it. My grandfather is like a quote unquote American, like the plainest, like would be surprised if the man ever had anything other than missionary sex in his life. But would be told, you're half white, you're half white, you're half white growing up, and trying to figure out what that meant. And what they're trying, I think what is trying to be approximated is, colorism in that regard, like structural issues in that regard. My criticisms of structuralism aside for a moment. But I don't think it's useful to transpose an empty identity onto a person anymore. I'm seeing it increasingly, if anything, unuseful, if not actively counterproductive. Because I think, kind of to what you were saying earlier, Caitlin, is that if we on the left, whatever the fuck that means, want to do something, so to be careful with how I phrase this, but the only way to defeat fascism that is historically been proven to be violence. I am not advocating violence. Violence is bad. But if we're talking about like socially, what we can do about this is on the left is creating spaces that allow for exploration, but not only like, I don't want to just say allow for it in the sense that like, hey, you can do it if you want to, but either actively encourage and offer comfort, because speaking from experience, that's fucking scary. Realizing that I was trans was scary. Like it just was. To a much lesser degree, learning about my Japanese-ness, whatever the fuck that means, was scary, because then now I have to look at a long history of both having been colonized and weebs, fuck you, doing a significant amount of colonizing. That itself, I mean, I didn't do it, but like looking at that itself is kind of like it's kind of scary. And learning like who you are or who you want to be is like, that's scary too. So, and I mean, FD's last video kind of touches on this, is like I should say it like this, giving people permission to learn who they are, you know? And especially like, not especially, but including straight white men. Because they don't exist. Like, I'm sorry, but they just don't. Like, that person does not exist. I don't care.
I'm going to put up a Homer retreating into the bushes gif over my face. But no, I get what you're saying. And I actually think I probably agree with what I think is meant there, which is that most of that is just social constructs that are negative for most people. Yeah. I'm still going to do the GIF though.
It's kind of like nonsense. Like, what does it mean to be straight anyway?
Yeah.
You like women? Like, okay, sir, do you want to dive into the concept of what a woman is? Because I have news for you.
Yeah. Once you start asking like a single question, it's just dominoes all the way down to like eviscerating that concept or all of those concepts. I'm sorry, Caitlin, you wanted to say something?
Something that you got into about identities is that they're not a coherent thing. They're a series of actions. You know, they're mostly interactionally achieved. You do it with other people. You do your identities with other people. You don't have like a little a piece of paper that says like, this is me, right? And that's something that's really scary. I think about like the 23andMe-ifying of our culture right now is this focus on what's in your DNA and what's in your genes. What does the science say about you and who you are, right? And that's where if I'm going to recommend anybody, Jedediah Carlson and Kevin Bird are two biologists who work on this a lot, who are interested in, the misuse of science and scientism. Something I'm interested in is the use of things like think tanks to push bad science in order to convince people of things which are not true and are not like morally helpful or are not, societally helpful. To give people this veneer of objectivity, rationality, to define race and gender and all kinds of other identities as being, you wouldn't believe the kind of crazy stuff they do with the GWAS and anything like personality traits, opinions, life outcomes, whatever. They'll just be like, I think there's a gene for being really into books that have a red jacket as opposed to other jackets. Like, honestly.
Or the violence gene. Jesus.
Yeah, the violence gene, the smarty pants gene, the high educational attainment gene. And then, they'll produce some paper that's like, oh, I only studied white people, so that means that it's not a racist study. But I think I found a couple of spots on the old genome that make you good at going to college. And then they just put it out there. And then somebody goes, oh, really? Well, here's this global database of a bunch of people's genomes. I'm just going to copy paste it over there. And hey, look, white people have more of that gene. How crazy is that? That it's bad science, but it's because we like to position ourselves as the rational ones, we being the white people. It's something that will just like slot right into our sense of our God-given right to rationality, right? Sorry, I got a little overexcited there.
No, you're good. You got me excited too. The
got me excited and like just
nobody apologize for being excited. This is a ham permissible channel. Go at it.
Good, because you have me here, dear. I'm not going to contain myself.
Yeah. By all means, just while out.
Great, awesome.
You said something that really rung like a lot of bells in my head. I'm forgetting what it was.
Let's see.
Then I got focused on
achieved.
Yes. Okay. So, all right.
Now you get excited there. So
there is I forget the actual people in question, but an ethnic group in pre-colonial Africa that practiced gender, because gender is a thing everywhere, right? But practiced gender and identified it as something specifically that you do, not something that you are necessarily. Whereas here, we look at it as something that you are, who you are can change. I'll say his name fine. fucking edgelord of the century, Max Stirner, engaging with the idea that the identity, the new translation is a phantasm, and I actually appreciate that new translation. But that identity is, it's impermanent. It is not static. It changes, and it can change in the span of like a minute. Just even, so I'm a geographer, and we think place and space, those are two different terms, but place is like the physical location of a thing. That even like your place, your physical location changes your identity fundamentally. If you pick me up and you put me in Tokyo right now, who I am will change immediately because I don't speak Japanese very well. So I will go from being a, so to speak, a so-called American, right, a Black American or a Black Japanese American, to being a diasporic foreigner. The moment I am in Tokyo, my identity will shift. And it'll shift without me even wanting it to. It just will. And it's because, fine, we'll do dissertation stuff.
Sorry.
It's it's okay. It's because our identities are not constructed solely by us. They're constructed by, like what Caitlin says, by interacting with things. So back then to the specific group of people in Africa recognizing gender as something that's done, they had gender roles, but your gender was designated purely by what it is that you did. So if you were doing a specific thing, you filled that role, and that was it. And it didn't matter what your genitalia were. It didn't matter what you were into, what you weren't into. It was, you're capable of this. This is your gender. Like literally, like your warrior gender. Like no fucking jokes. That's your gender. You're like dad gender, which is like low-key kind of something that I vibe with. But like that's what it is.
My gender, dad gender.
We're dad gender. Yeah. Dad wife is my vibe. Yeah. But if you kind of like map the idea of like who you are and what you do, and you just like smash them together, you get this idea of interaction. And who you are then becomes like literally constructed like every moment of every day, both by the things that are inhuman around you, the things that are human around you, the things that are alive, the things that are unalive. I am produced in part thanks to my now, love you dear, dead cat Sebastian. He is no longer here. I have no physical interaction with him anymore, save for his fur that still manages to get in my mouth. He sheds everywhere. But he doesn't exist anymore beyond here, beyond me. And he's still reproducing me. It's specifically that interaction that's creating my identity, in part, a very small part, but a part nonetheless. And that's happening basically an infinite number of times every single day throughout your day. And we're all doing it to each other. You're doing it to me. I'm doing it to you. We can't avoid it.
Yeah. It's really granular too. I used to work at a school as a teacher, and I will again, but right now I'm not doing that. And I knew I was a different person when I was in the classroom with my 10th graders versus when I was in the classroom with my 5th graders. They require a different kind of person in that room with them. And when you stop and take note of that, it really shows you how multifaceted identity is and how context dependent it is.
Mm. So if we're looking for something to stop, I didn't make that point. I made that point. We can cut this. I did make that point. I wanted to make sure that I got that in, but I think my Adderall's wearing off, so I'm going to grab another pill.
Okay.
I love talking to other people with ADHD.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. No.
It's really nice.
Oh, do we all have ADD in this? Is this okay? Cool. We can all share our fidget toys.
This is a leftist podcast about fascism and identity.
What do you think?
Yeah. No, I've actually had to specifically like tailor the things on my desks that are so they're quiet.
I could see you doing I'm not in my normal space, so I'm really having to resist like looking at and touching things.
Yeah.
And you're welcome for that, by the way.
I do appreciate it very much. Thank you. Yeah, okay. Yeah, apparently we are. This is everybody here has ADD. Is what we've discovered.
I think of it as because like medical symptoms, like medical diagnoses, they're a social construct as much as everything else. And we're using it to label what we call symptoms. But for me, it's just like an alternative state of being. And if society weren't constructed so to like regiment my behavior or our behavior, I guess, this way of thinking might well be useful in another context. I don't think that we have it accidentally, is what I guess I think I'm saying.
Yeah, it actually made me very proficient when I was working on an ambulance, because I was able to like essentially like ping pong multitask between like a bunch of very serious different things that I had to navigate. So I usually didn't take my medication when I was going to work because it made me worse at my job.
The ADHD brain is very, very good in a crisis, very good with sudden changes. I mentioned to my doctor when I was thinking, because I had a psychologist tell me like, hey, if you go back to school, you should get some ADHD meds. That would make your life better. And I was like, yeah, that's probably true. And I brought it up with my doctor, and he's just like, oh, you have ADHD? I wouldn't have noticed any, like, you don't really seem like someone, that wouldn't have been my diagnosis, yada, yada. And I'm like, I'm a personal trainer and an acrobat, sir. Like, you seem to function really well. And you're like, yes, because I am always on the go. Bless his heart. He's a delightful, delightful man. But it's like, it's just that I had the luck of ending up in a line of work that is very much, be out there and wild and be physical and like jump from thing to thing. And and now I'm thriving. The hard part is answering emails. That's the part I struggle with.
Oh my God, don't email me.
Yeah, just don't
fucking email me. If you have to talk to me, text me or call me right when you need to speak to me, or just don't. I will forget. I have like thousands of emails that I'm just never going to get to.
Yep.
Yeah,
just delete them. Free yourself. Free yourself. Make the little tag go away.
I just ignore the number. I pretend they don't exist.
Yeah.
Sorry, I derailed us.
I don't even know what it is. The number.
No, that's
think about it.
I actually I didn't start taking ADHD medication until 3 years ago. I've got 33 years of coping. I take it now, when I work in the hospital, because I'm doing bullshit that doesn't require actual paying attention. And I'm trying to not be overloaded sensory wise from the loud environment. And that's really the only reason I take it, is because I can focus on one thing instead of getting sensory overload. But yeah, if it weren't for the fact that I have a day job, I'd probably just not take the Adderall at all. Yeah.
Well, if we're talking about ADD,
yeah,
and we're trying to connect things back to what makes fascism a thing, it is that essentially what we're articulating. It is so. I'm not a structuralist, and I have my criticisms of the idea, my criticisms. I think it's bullshit, but
that's a criticism.
It does touch on kind of what we're talking about, the rigidity of structure, so to speak. It's the restriction, right? And it does it to everyone. It does it to me. It does it to everyone that's talking now. And it's why I like the spate of Black creators that are starting to explore what Blackness is, what it means to be Black. Because I'm of the opinion that categorical identities like that are functionally infinite, because there's no singular way to be one particular thing. The way to be a particular thing is to be that person that's doing that thing. And it sounds really circular, and it doesn't make sense because like we were saying, identities have no solid basis necessarily. they are fundamentally constructed like inside of you as a person. So what it means to be gay or to be a lesbian or black or a man or masculine or feminine is entirely dependent upon the person that you're talking to, essentially, and what they're doing, and whether or not, and this is like something that I saw in like self-identification, whether or not you believe that person's self-identification. Because if we're talking about the idea of interaction, self-identification is the process of recognizing that you have a vote in another person's construction of themselves, and you're giving up that vote to that person. You're saying, I'm just going to believe what you tell me. I'm not going to fight you on it, because one, I think that's kind of silly, unless you're Rachel Dolezal. Please stop. But I think it's a bit silly to contest someone over their identity. So choosing to believe them is literally giving up that vote and allowing that person, literally giving them permission and freedom to express who they are in their own way, and constructing that thing right then in that moment. So if we're talking about what it is that leads to fascism, it's restricting that expression, is literally restricting self-expression. You're forcing people to adhere to this tiny little box. So then when people like want to explore something that isn't like manly, so to speak, he's prevented from doing so because of the fear of backlash, because of the shame that is likely to result from being a man that is doing things that aren't manly. It's like, it is, if I'm pulling like on my own emotional experience with it, it's fucking terrifying.
Well, it's the reason why that what is a woman question is not a gotcha, you know. People want it to be one, but it just isn't. And it's because if you really sit back and you think about what it is to be a person going through the world, you're meeting and observing and interacting with all of these people who are all doing their gender the way that they do it. And that is data for your brain. That is you taking, you're taking that in, you're deciding how much do I value this person's idea of how the world works. And that is also factoring into the schema that you're creating, and I think something that we really forget and that we ignore is how much communication we're doing to babies and small children about what gender is. And who's a boy and who's a girl and who's neither, my daughter has a favorite YouTuber who's non-binary. And so like, that's an important data point for her that other people didn't really have in the past. And I hope that that's having an impact, that like, there are ways to be a person that's not just boy, girl, princess, dinosaur, but my master's thesis was in a preschool, and I saw a lot of gender policing from the adults. I literally sat there while a little girl expressed her interest in dinosaurs, and the parent volunteer said, "You don't like dinosaurs, you like princesses."
Jesus.
And we just don't think that that's a thing that happens. I don't know. Like, people are conveying their beliefs about gender all the time, and we're taking it in and we're deciding how much we have to value it.
It just the balloons that people get when a baby's born. Like, was there a pink balloon in that hospital room, or was there a blue one? Like, it starts right away. I mean, it starts before the kid's even born. Like I've heard people say, "Oh yeah, we know he's a boy because of the way he kicks," and it turns out like the fetus is female. It's like it's absolutely bizarre how attached to this gender conditioning that people are, and it feels like my head is full of bees every single time one of these like, what is a woman people say, like, stop pushing your gender ideology on us.
Yeah.
It's like, like, stop making.
Yeah.
Sorry, go on.
This idea of ideology, right? People really think that only other people have them, and the rest of us are just operating off of pure unadulterated facts.
Wonderful has a. Oh, sorry. Go on.
One of the things that I like to remind people of is some ideologies are true. Some ideologies are things like, the Earth is an oblong spheroid or whatever. Like, that's an ideology, but it's one that we've come to after a lot of observation.
That's something that I have talked to people a lot about, is this whole like, well, we disagree. Who's to say that your opinion is better than mine? And it's not always true, but a general rule to follow when it comes to assessing whether or not somebody's ideas are good ones is how willing are they to change them? Mm-hmm. How willing are they to update those ideas? If you are set in a way of thinking and that is just how you think, you're probably not on the ball as much as you think you are, because we're constantly learning more. And if you're not changing how you view the world, you're probably not the most informed.
Right. Mm. And as Bellamy was saying earlier about, the way that we kind of think about rationality and the way we think about facts versus feelings, thoughts versus feelings, it's much more of a single system than we want to believe. And then we're also really good at rationalizing after the fact. So you can convince yourself that you came to something after considering all the facts available to you when you actually made the decision and then looked for the facts that would help you feel good about that decision.
Yep. Absolutely.
It's this like, it's like, I keep coming back to the same like conclusion. It's like, everything is about the self, because like you can't interact with the world as anything other than you. It's just not possible. Like you literally can't be objective because you can't not look through your own eyes with your own thoughts. It's not a thing, and that's not a bad thing. Like it's just a thing. Like that's the way the world is, and it's fine. We can't not do it that way, so it kind of has to be fine. But fuck, I lost it again. There was something there, but I lost it again.
Well, that's one reason why it's so important to accept other people's perspectives, right? Is that we only have our own. And so if we only went off of our own, we'd be so badly blinkered. You need other people, you need community, and you, like you said about identity, right? Like maybe some identity self-identifications are inauthentic, but that's so vanishingly rare. It would really hobble us, I shouldn't say hobble us, that's really cruel. It would really hurt us though to
Sorry. Oh my God. I was getting a call reminding me that I have to go.
Okay.
No worries.
That was the reminder.
No worries. Actually, Ben, I know you have to bail in a few minutes, and it looked like you wanted to say something there. Do you want to just kind of
please say the thing?
Say your thing and then roll out?
Yeah, I think. Well, there was one specific thing that I don't even know where this would go. It's kind of like hodgepodged in there when it comes to, dare I say, connecting with fascists and kind of opening up those conversations. Obviously, it kind of starts with recognizing that not your responsibility, don't need to do the emotional labor, don't need to put yourself in danger. All of those things are a given. But for those of us, and I know that I'm one of these people who want to kind of engage and want to find a way to maybe, if there is a way to resist fascism without violence, it's going to sound so silly, but something that I've had a surprising amount of luck with when I end up in one of these conversations with someone who is being really aggressive towards me, I legit ask, what sort of things do you enjoy? I ask, what sort of things do you enjoy? And the response is 50-50. Either it's, oh, why the fuck do you care? F slur, like, that does happen. But this is the reason that I bring it up is because there's a lot of, I've noticed in many leftist spaces, conversations about how to identify someone who is willing to change and how to identify someone who is just sea lining and is wasting your time and just trying to make your life worse. And this is one of the kind of like little shortcuts that I found to do that, of if they respond, like just really aggressively, well, yeah, they're just trying to make your life worse. Or if they don't want to answer the question, they're probably just wasting your time. But I guess what I've sort of been finding, there goes my call again. What I've been finding is that oh my gosh, totally lost my train of thought there.
Well, so what you're actually, oh God, go.
Oh yeah, no, just that people aren't going to listen until they feel heard. and sometimes you don't want to hear their message, and it's garbage and it's rough to sit through. But to get to the sort of end goal of them listening to you and seeing you as a person, sometimes you have to lead by seeing them as a person. I hope that I'm making sense.
No, you're making a ton of sense, and it's.
Yeah.
I'll back up your point here in a second, but yes.
So yeah, that made good sense, and I thank you for joining us, and I know you got to bounce, so I appreciate your presence.
Much. Yeah, thank you. I'm just going to turn on my stuff here so that you guys can keep recording, and let's do this again. This was great.
Yeah,
Even
absolutely.
a fly on the wall.
Thanks again.
Bye.
Bye, dear. I love you. Yeah. So what he's talking about is like directly engaging with the point that I was making earlier, right? Like we don't emotion ourselves into or we don't logic ourselves into ideology. We emotion ourselves that way. I'm not going to advocate for anyone being nice to fascists or anything like that. But if that's something that you want to engage with, then the means of doing that is to understand that you're going to be emotioning them out of it. And you're going to be doing so by humanizing them and humanizing yourself. And it's going to need to be something private, too. That's not something that I think you can put on display in the world. The only, I think, emotion that is useful, like in the public sphere, and I say only, that's a big statement, but one of the only emotions I think that is useful in the public sphere when dealing with fascists is shame. If you make them feel silly, if you mock them, then that's something that like they know they don't want that. And if you see like in the manifestos like of the mass shooters, like they want to feel cool. That's part of the reason they're doing it. So if they're made to feel silly, it's going to demotivate a lot of that, I think. But if you're talking about like an interpersonal sort of dealing, it's just that. It's what Finn was talking about. It's engaging that person as a person emotionally and giving them the permission. So I one of the things that I think is probably true more or less is that fascists are in a fuck ton of pain. And we're in probably maybe even more pain before they got to fascism. And being allowed to look at that, like so it's this idea in Buddhism called self-compassion. And it's something that I've taken, kind of cleaved off the self and like integrated the compassion into the thing like completely. But you are actually less likely to look at something harmful that you've done if you feel guilty about it than you are if you're giving yourself a little bit of room. And you don't even need like Johnny Depp levels of room here. We're talking like a little bit of like, I did a thing that I don't like that I did. However, I'm a human being. I make mistakes. This was going on in my life. That was going on in my life. It's not like excuses. It's reasons. It's context. And it actually gives you more power to look at the thing. So if you're talking about de-radicalization, I mean, the best form of de-radicalization is interruption. But de-radicalization, if you're talking about it in those terms, is done on that level, on that emotional level where you're asking people and giving them like permission to like be human in that moment. And that means it's going to be really fucking messy. And it's going to be kind of gross and it's going to be really uncomfortable. And if most people, I think, looked at the conversation and what was said, they wouldn't be very happy about it. But that's how that would happen, essentially, which is why I think it should be private. Yeah,
for sure. And I think you're absolutely right that, you know, it doesn't do anyone good to treat a person like they're not a person, or to, you know, it also just doesn't make logical sense to act like, you know, you're not a person. We need to think about humanity and even the dark parts of humanity in terms of humanity. I don't know if this is correct or not, but I think my main focus is really on convincing people who are fence sitters or people who kind of like are sympathetic but not active enough to become more active. I don't know if I have the tools to de-radicalize people who are already radicalized, but maybe that's something I should be working on getting together.
Well, I mean, I'm in the same boat as you. I mean, like if there is a collective meta purpose to my show, it is to move the fence sitters further left And I am not in a position to, and I've made a short video on this actually. I'm not in a position to de-radicalize anybody. Like Bellamy said, that's a messy, deep, dark, very fundamentally human process that you can't do on a live stream. And I think anybody who's trying to do it via that method is probably doing more harm than good. And I don't know what the alternatives are. I don't know what folks like me with this platform should do in that regard, or if we should even try. But I really don't. I have more negative opinions about the public efforts at de-radicalization than I do positive at this point, is where I would put myself.
I think, honestly, that the both of you are probably doing infinitely more good focusing on fence sitters than you are on out and out fascists, because the left is very small, it is, and so are the fascists. There's not that many fascists, and I mean bona fide I'm a fascist. They're not that many of these people. The dudes that got, which is very funny, by the way, fuck the police, but this was very funny when they got arrested in Idaho out of the back of a U-Haul truck. I mean, just imagine riding in a sweaty fucking U-Haul truck with a bunch of other sweaty people.
It was a long time, wasn't it? They were in there.
I would be humiliated personally, and earnestly saying I would feel really, no, but I think that the vast majority of people are somewhere in the middle, mm-hmm. and may not be paying any deference to fascists even overtly. But I think you're doing, if there is, I think, value in from a deradicalization standpoint, it is in what you two are doing in focusing on fence sitters. Yeah. Because if you can stop them from being fascists, then we're good.
That's better. Yeah.
If there are just less fascists and more people, if there are less fascists and more people willing to stand up to fascists, then they become less and less consequential over time. Yeah.
I tend to think of it like a walkway with a lot of booths at it, right? And so I'm at one booth, but I'm not just interested in my booth. I'm actually interested in getting you to walk one booth to the right of me. Mm. And so I'm going to sell you the stuff that I think is going to speak to you right now as a centrist normie. But that also says but have you heard from my friend Stephen Molyneux? Yeah, he's a little to the right of me. I don't agree with him on everything, but maybe you want to ask him what he thinks about Western civilization. And then, you get to him and he's like, well, how about you ask this guy over to the right of me? And how about you ask this guy over to the right of me? And so I want to walk over to the middle of this walkway and stand in front of it with a bullhorn and say, here's why you shouldn't take that guy seriously. He doesn't have anything to offer you, really. And so, sometimes I get criticized for focusing on liberals because he's a liberal, he's a good man, and I have to say, I just don't want him telling you to walk one booth to the right. That's all I want.
Yeah. I actually think of myself essentially as a naked propagandist. I have a booth and I'm doing that, but telling
you're
people,
over there to the left.
Hey, have you checked out this person over here? I don't agree with them on everything necessarily, but maybe you should ask them about capitalism.
That's one of the things that honestly just kind of if I get annoyed at the left, it's that the left knows very well how to talk to itself. Mm. It does not know very well how to talk to other people.
Yeah.
And you hear it in the language used. Because we can make in-jokes all the time, oh, I don't use big words, and then the word is hegemonic. Well, honey, how many people have heard the word hegemonic?
Yeah.
We know what that means, and it seems silly to us that other people don't know what that means, but, most people haven't read Gramsci. They just haven't. It's this, fundamental disconnect from, the rest of the world. And it's why people I don't know if you know who these people are, but it's why people like Fresh and Fit or Abbott and Preach get taken very seriously by people that are somewhere in the middle or whatever that means. And it's because they have this regular person sort of vibe to them, and they're not talking a fucking like a leftist, whatever you want to
Yeah.
call it. Like they're not speaking like a different language. They're talking in common tongue, whatever the fuck that means.
Yeah.
So I think there's a lot of value in like learning how to talk, like criticize away, whatever. But like, yeah, like you kind of got to talk to liberals. Like you just do. If you've ever done any sort of organizing in your community, you're talking to liberals. Like, I'm sorry, you just are.
Yeah. Well, you know, I write and work for a magazine called Liberal Currents. I think I can say a thing or two about talking to liberals. They get to edit my work, so.
Oh God, that might be the most unenviable position I've ever heard.
Yeah, I am
Well,
not.
listen.
I am not
The
jealous.
thing about Liberal Currents, I do actually love it, and it's because
I do like liberal currents, though.
it's because their main kind of operating worldview is that liberalism shouldn't be antithetical to social justice. And so I don't necessarily touch the liberalism part. I just write the social justice part, and they're okay with that. So that's where I get to live.
It's I remember I was on a live stream with Innuendo Studios for a brief period, and he made a really good point that like shifts in ideology don't happen like they're not massive usually. There are events that tend to like radicalize people, like Uvalde, because I mean I think everyone kind of saw what cops do or don't do in that situation. But most of like political shifts, they happen incrementally, and they take a long time, and they take repeated conversations, often about like the same exact things over and over and over again. So you might be what he was saying, what Ian was saying is, I'm sorry if I can't call you Ian, but I don't know what else to call you. What he was saying is that you might be one point along the way, and you may only speak to that person one time. And it's important to remember that like you're not trying to like you are trying to change the world, but you're not trying to do like revolution in the moment. You're a single person doing a singular thing. And it's like really important, I think, to keep that context in mind. Because like, okay, maybe I'm not changing this person's mind, but you know what? I talked to them, and maybe I'm the 15th person to have talked to them, and now they're actually going to think about it for a little bit.
Or what I say is going to stick in their mind for the person who actually does help them change their mind.
It's the social justice equivalent of shopping cart theory, right? Just your job is to just put that one shopping cart back when you're done with it, and maybe somebody sees you do it and feels bad about not doing it, and then hopefully that replicates. Like my personal mantra has very often just been, I don't think that there's like supererogatory demands on people in most situations. I think you're obligated to do what you can when you can within your means and replicate that mentality amongst others.
So I'm learning increasingly about myself that I'm the theory person. So I'll do a small amount of it here. But the operating theory that I use is called affect theory. And it's not like affect theory from Deleuze, although kind of, and not from Spinoza, although kind of. And if you know who Brian Masumi is, it's definitely not that, although kind of. Brian Masumi was wrong about so many things. But affect theory is the idea that essentially the interaction, what we were talking about earlier, that interaction is the way that reality is, more or less. Like that's how reality works, is that interacting with things changes them fundamentally each set and every time it happens. And the things that color our, what we would term reflexes, our responses, are essentially a collection of affects, a collection of experiences over life. So even if you come to a situation that you've never been in before, you have this wealth of experiences that you're drawing from that give you an approximate response. It's like we recognize this, like the military does this when they train. They're training you to do specific things with the understanding that you've never actually been in this situation, but this is how you're going to respond. Pianists do this, right? When you train on the piano, you're training your fingers. You're literally giving yourself experiences over and over and over again. So then when it comes time to play a song, you can sit down and play a song. And really good pianists have been doing it for so long that they can sit down and play a song from sheet music in front of them that they've never played before. And it's because of this affect. It's specifically because of this interaction that is training you over and over and over again. So if you want like a theoretical way to look at it, and literally like a metaphysical way to look at it, it's that. It's what you're doing is you're what I like to, one of the things I like to say, I have a bunch of quotes that I like to pull from in my brain that I say all the time. But one of my favorites is on purpose with purpose. So instead of being out there affecting other people accidentally, understand it and do it on purpose. Be in the world on purpose. Affect people around you in a specific way on purpose. And trans women, like, we do this. Trans men, like, I would say everyone does this, but I think that trans women have like a hyper awareness of this happening. I think trans people in general who have a hyper awareness of this happening because we are very aware of our perception. Black people, especially darker skinned Black people, I think are aware of this happening and carry ourselves ourselves being trans. I am not dark skinned for the audience. Carry ourselves in very specific ways to elicit very specific responses or to approximate what we think will probably come from us. Women know how to do this. When you're dealing with a dangerous man or a man that you think could become dangerous or is likely to become dangerous, you learn to smile and to appease. It's literally just that. It's just understanding that you have consequence for the things around you. And using that consequence on purpose, essentially.
Yeah, intentionality, I think, is hugely important. That's in reference to something Finn said earlier, similar to that, about like masculinity and like actively trying to create like a positive, healthy masculinity. I've been very intentional about the way that I put myself out there publicly because I am a cis white male who looks like this. And one of the first things that I did was settle on, I'm going to stream Stardew Valley, and my color scheme is going to be very feminine. And that is done. Purple happens to be my favorite color by chance, but it's also, it's done with a level of intentionality because like just that little bit, I think, for some dude out there who is feeling lost about himself and not knowing like what it means to be a young man, just having some dude who looks like a cop who's going to corner you at a party and talk about Joe Rogan be okay with the color pink can actually have value to that person. And I've had people online tell me, they're like, I couldn't even imagine a guy that looks like you playing Stardew Valley in a pink room, and it meant a lot to me. And just like that little bit of thinking about how you present yourself to the world can make a world of difference.
Absolutely. Something that I do recommend to people who don't really feel this kind of interaction of identity with context is to change something about your appearance once and just see what happens when you go out. I noticed early on as a girl, as like a teenage young adult, sometimes I would have blonde hair, sometimes I would have brown hair. That's enough to experience a difference in how the world kind of works around you and how people work around you. I like to wear a lot of makeup, but sometimes I don't feel like it and I wear no makeup. Big difference in how the world reacts. I am still not totally used to the way that the world is different for me as a purple-haired person versus as
it's purple. I thought it was blue.
Oh, yeah.
I'm colorblind. I'm sorry.
No, that's good.
It's still a great color.
Thank you. But, you know, that change, I just touched it up and like got it redone, and it's a lot more vibrant than it was. And I forgot how different, like, you know, people would look at me and talk to me when I looked like a blonde person versus like a purple-haired person. Just make a change and look and see kind of how flimsy your sense of how people act to other people is.
Do an experiment.
Yeah, do a little experiment.
It's literally, it's just an experiment. Do an experiment.
Yeah. My husband did this in high school. He changed his hair to be blue, and he was so struck. He's a white cisgendered man. And he was really struck by how different things were for him when he was a blue-haired white cisgender man versus a brown-haired white cisgender man.
I actually think that there's going back to like the emptiness created by the structures we have, be they whiteness, capitalism, etc., and like fascism imposing on that. I think that the one thing that fascism does not tolerate is a vacuum or is uncertainty. And you can look at this with like comments under the What is a Woman video of people who are fans of it, is they're like, we know the truth, certainty. We have absolute to the core certainty about reality and ourselves. It's like, I think like ACAB includes Plato as far as I'm concerned at this point. But like I'm totally comfortable with examining my conceptions of the world, my morality, my identity. And I'm actually like very comfortable with there not being anything underneath those that's holding them up. If you really get to the bottom of it, it's just vibes all the way down. Not vibes, but like things that make sense in their context all the way down. But there's not like this firm objective basement layer that we're ever going to hit. And that scares the shit out of a lot of people, to the extent that they won't even take the time to like, what if I dye my hair blue?
Yeah.
Because I think in the back of their like reptile brain, they know like that leads them down a chain to maybe there's nothing down there. And then that is something fascists seize on.
See, you're articulating something that I think is like really important. Is that our identity, who we are, has no objective basis. It just doesn't. And that's fine. It just means that you have to take your identity seriously, in essence, and understand that you're actively making it. And it's like, and I mean, also that you're making it for other people. And there's a point I want to make about that. But it's to understand that like your identity isn't grounded in any sort of objective reality. It's like grounded in you. So then like that sounds really scary until you think about it for a second, at least for me, because that means then I can do what the fuck I want.
Yeah.
Like I can have, and you said like vibes, but like literally I can fucking vibe.
Yeah.
And that's dope.
It's
because I'm allowed to just fucking chill. Like I could be a dad wife and no one can say shit to me about it because I'm just vibing, dude. Like I'm just minding my business. And I'm not hurting you by doing
chill
that.
About it, right?
Literally, like just be chill about it. Like that person calling themselves a lesbian has nothing to do with you. That's them. It's literally just them and they're vibing. And allowing them the freedom to vibe actually it's reproductive. So to make the point that I wanted to make that I said earlier, and it's something that I've said to FD, it's something I've said to Farm Man, and now I'm going to say it to you, Mark. And I'm probably going to cry, but we'll see if I get there. Had I had a man in my life growing up that did girly things when I was a teenager, I would have realized so much earlier that I wasn't a man. Because someone around me doing it gave me permission. I wasn't afforded the room to do that until I was solid enough in myself to give myself permission. But had another person been present in doing those things, even tangentially, like not even like literally in front of me, but had just seen on TV a person, a man present, just vibing and completely comfortable in himself, would have afforded me like the brain space to be like, wait a minute, maybe I'm something else. Like, or maybe I can just do something. Like, even if I think of myself as a man and just do this other thing, like who the fuck cares? It's so like, if there's something I can say to the people that may listen to this or anyone that would hear it, that have that fear, it's that it is incredibly freeing to literally just let yourself vibe, and not to hurt other people, but to just vibe on your own. That it's like, it's a feeling that I'm really like, I'm incapable of describing.
And that right there is what the fascists are afraid of, right? Is that if you got to see somebody who is expressing some freedom in their gender, then that might have inspired you to think about what's going on with yourself, and let you feel like you had some freedom in how you should be. That is unacceptable, because fascism depends on control and conformity, right? So that's all this stuff about, think of the children, think of the women. It's not coming from a place of care. It's coming from a place of control.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, thank you for that. That's, that is, I hadn't considered that angle actually, like, but I'm happy that it might have that effect on people. I want everybody to be, I just want the world to be cooler to people, right? Like, I just want everybody to be like, not sucky. Like, can we just all, it's so cliche, but like, can't we all just fucking chill and vibe and get along? Like, goddamn.
You are
like,
giving people. You're giving people more space than I think you realize.
Yeah.
Significantly more space than I think you realize. And you're never even going to meet some of the people that you've given space to, but you have consequence for an individual somewhere. And I promise you do. We all do. We can't not, but absolutely you do. And you're doing it intentionally. It really matters.
I mean, I hope so. And to anybody who's watching this and like listening to this, like, it's okay, right? Like, just do the thing that's going to make you happy, provided you can do it in a way that's safe for you. Like, we're in a time, and the impetus for this conversation was things are dangerous for people right now, and I want to be very mindful of that. I don't want to encourage somebody to do something that's going to make them unsafe, but it's okay to explore who you are and to define who you are on your own terms. And even if that makes somebody else uncomfortable, provided it's safe for you, who cares, right? Like, there's a lot of shit that makes me uncomfortable about other people and stuff they do. That's my fucking problem, not theirs. Like, and that's how I respond to it. If somebody does something that makes me uncomfortable, I go, huh. And then I carry on about my day, because that's not on them. My discomfort and disgust is not somebody else's problem. And that's the problem with fascists, is they have that recoiling response, and instead of addressing it and going, well, that's kind of a me thing, I'll work on that later in therapy, they put it on the person. And that is the destruction of society, is when you externalize your internal feelings of revulsion or discomfort. And that's what I want to end in the world if I can. But yeah, that's kind of where I'm at, is I want people to not be shitty to other people. Like, just don't be shitty.
Imagine.
Yeah. And showing people a way to be a man that doesn't involve impinging on other people's lives, and doesn't involve policing other people, and that invites community and, the comfort and positivity and love, even. That's really important. And that's what we need out of people. And at the risk of being a wife guy on here, like, that's what my husband does, and that's what I really love about him, is that especially watching him be a dad, is just the best thing in the whole world, because he just has so much nurturing energy in him that he's giving to our kids, that now I might cry about it, so that's cool. That, like, that's exactly what I always wanted in a partner, and I think people need to know that. I think men need to know that that's what people are looking for, not just me. I'm not the only person, I don't think, in the world who's looking for that in a partner. Is that, the best thing about him is how much loving energy he has and how much nurturing he's able to give to our kids.
Yeah. So actually, it ties in, I promise. Okay. But I was talking to my partner about this the other day. I think it was yesterday. Because there is this sounds like it doesn't connect, but I think it does. There's like this shitty dating advice that people will give to men. It's like, be confident if you want to find a partner. And like, it doesn't feel like it means anything, because in your head, you're thinking like, well, I'm not confident. Like, how do I just be
Just be it.
confident? Yeah. But I was talking to my partner about it, and the thing that got them like back into my life was not me like being like some sort of weird confident whatever. Like, I literally texted them and was like, I'm only texting you because I was reminded about you on Twitter, and not you specifically, but just like something reminded me of memory of you. Full admission, I'm texting you this because it's COVID and I'm fucking lonely. Like, do you want to hang out?
Mhm.
And they said yes. And now we've been dating for several months. Like, being like open and honest and vulnerable is like freeing in a way that I don't know how to articulate it.
Mhm.
And not everyone, and to be honest about it too, not everyone's going to respond to that well. A lot of people are going to respond to that very harshly. But I think what you'll find is that the people that do respond to that well are people that have like a lasting importance in your life. And they're the people that will be there if you get sick. They're the people that don't leave if you get depressed.
Mhm.
They're the people that don't judge you if you have certain feelings and will talk about them with you. Because there's this like in-depth sort of existence in your life. It may not even be romantic, but it's just it's very real in a way that basing it on like nonsense ideas of what a man is, of what a woman is. Like, I think you actually had it backward earlier, Mark. You said that it has no concrete basis, your identities. I think it's actually flipped. I think that these like fake constructions of objective things, they actually are based on nothing. And that's why those relationships feel so empty. But when you're basing them in you, then they have a place to ground themselves, and it just feels a lot more fulfilling. And that it ties into fascism somehow. I'm thinking about like what you said about feeling empty and that sense of like non-belonging anywhere sort of thing.
Yeah.
I think that's like one of the things that like fundamentally can deal with that is like, hey, this sucks, right? Like, just saying it to people. Because they promise you that, like, if you're a high school aged boy or whatever, and you're looking around and you're like, fuck, this sucks. Like, you are not the only person that feels that way. And saying that to other boys around you is going to give them the freedom to say that as well. And it just opens up like all these possibilities. It's so like infinitely creative that it's, I mean, it can be scary sometimes, but it's really fun.
Well, one of the things fascism wants to do, right, is make it unsafe to be vulnerable and make it unsafe to seek connection, really deep connection, right? Because if it's not safe to do that, then you have to fall back on this sort of brittle and hollow strength. And that's one of the things that your bad dating advice does, right? It says, you know, be confident without any kind of understanding that what they're really saying is people will respond to you if you're honest and vulnerable. The best thing, and that's what these things that look like confidence to that dating advice person, that's what that really is. And you can't do that. You can't be vulnerable and open and raw with somebody unless you have a place to go if it doesn't work, right? If you put yourself out there trying to get connection with somebody and it doesn't work, and you don't have somebody who like loves you unconditionally or who's able to hear your pain and be there for you, you might go somewhere really dark, and it's not a safe thing to do.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. Like, I think that's one of the reasons that, and maybe this is like, if there's a meta to this conversation or like a through theme, is this creation of void in people, and then fascism exploiting that void and also beating down anything that would fill it other than itself. So like vulnerability or weakness is, like Caitlin said, one of the first things fascist does is make any perceived weakness be tantamount to being the enemy, right? And that's wrapped up in like so many of the things. It's wrapped up in, you know, whiteness and patriarchy and colonialism and all of these things that are this nebulous construct that filters down into this shit ideology that we're battling. And at bottom, it's just a fear. It cannot abide the fear that there might be an alternative that involves a genuine connection with other human beings.
Yeah. I think one of the best things we can do is really show how unappealing that is in comparison to the joy and comfort and freedom of being able to be yourself with people who accept you.
Mm.
Yeah, it's fun over here.
Yeah,
it is really
have fun. We have real friendships. Like, you know, we're a real community who actually supports each other. And if somebody has trouble or is hurt or needs something or even messes up, like, we're here for each other. And I think that's really important to make sure that we're able to show the world.
I think that becomes really evident when you look at how people on the right interact with the world versus people in this sphere interact with the world, and how virulently someone on the right will react to something that seems inconsequential. And I think it's a marker of a profound sense of unhappiness.
Mm-hmm.
Even if they take joy in doing really heinous things, which I'm not really inclined to interrogate how much of that is joy and how much of that is a twisted sort of joy, because I value my mental health.
Mm-hmm.
But I think if you look at how they interact with the world, you can see how miserable of an existence that is. The example you gave way long ago, Caitlin, of a woman telling a little girl that she can't like dinosaurs. There's nothing about that screams happy person to me.
Mm-hmm.
And to think that I have to place value, or not value, but I have to spend my time doing that to people when I could be doing literally anything else. That's just, nothing about that sounds fun. That just sounds fucking miserable. Whereas over here, Mark doing purple is
that's much cooler.
it's really fucking cool. I'm not doing purple. I have a lot of blue and pink in my room. We're looking at my white wall right now.
Yeah, I was going to say.
I have a bunch of blue and a pink in my room. But it's cool because I get to enjoy the purple that Mark has for itself just because it's there. I'm and reminded that I like purple. Kind of forgot for a little while. And then seeing that Caitlin's hair is purple, even though I'm colorblind, I'm it's just, it sounds like a really trivial example, but it is so reproductive to just be able to take joy in other people taking joy in things. It makes me feel happy to see other people having fun. And if you've ever watched other people have fun, you want to have fun too, you know?
Yeah. Even if that thing that they're doing doesn't seem fun to you, it's still joyful seeing those people having fun doing the thing. Totally. And yeah,
I think that's why Let's Plays are so popular.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. I'll even watch one, and I don't play any video games at all. And I'll watch a stream. That's fun. That's cool. You're having a good time. But yeah, that's something that we need to remember, is that there's no good reason to change what you're doing on the basis of somebody who's clearly very insecure, trying to regain or maintain control over their environment. That's not a happy, healthy person, and it's not a happy, healthy choice.
Absolutely not. We might be coming up on a good spot to end it on. Do either of you have a final thought that you want to throw out there before we plug everybody's pluggables?
I'm happy.
Okay.
if there's a throwable to throw out there, it's that. It's literally making things is fun. And you can make a space for yourself that's just purely based on enjoying things. I am unironically a hedonist. And that doesn't mean overconsume, because if you overconsume, the thing goes away. You can't enjoy it anymore. But I think just taking joy for the sake of just joy itself. If there's a message out there, it's I think that, I mean, I don't know if that ties so much into the rise. I think it does tie into the rise of fascism, but
I think
if there's
defining
anyone
joy is
listening,
important, right? If we can't hold on to joy, if we can't produce joy, if we can't make sure that everyone around us is kind of capable of experiencing it, then we're a little bit lost. I think we need that.
Yeah, have fun. Literally, just have fun without hurting people. Have fun.
Right.
Have fun without hurting people. I think that's
Unless they want to be hurt. Some people
unless they want to be hurt. We'll count that as fun, though.
But make sure
That
it's
is
in
fun.
the way that they specified and agreed on ahead of time.
Yes.
Yeah, talk to them about it. It's a strange concept.
Be honest.
Have consensual
be vulnerable, be open,
fun.
right? Yeah.
Have fun with active, ongoing consent. Get out there
You'll
and
find
do
that
it.
you're making even more joy that way.
Check in with your partner.
All right. I think that might be a good spot to end it on. Bellamy, Caitlin, thank you so much for joining me. Fox, Finn as well. I'll go ahead and plug Finn's stuff since he's not on the stream anymore, but it's FintasticMrFox on Twitter and YouTube. Go check him out. He does wonderful stuff. If y'all want to plug your pluggables, and then we'll call it a show.
Well, you can follow me on Twitter at Caitlin Mariah, which that's where I put everything. So my website's on there where you can go to my articles and things, and my other podcast appearances and things, because that's one of my favorite things to do, is talk to my friends on podcasts.
Well, you can follow me on Twitter at Bellamy Rhea. I have a YouTube channel, and I'm currently working on the next video that I'm trying to do. Bellamy Rhea on YouTube. I'm hoping to start a podcast, but looking for specifically a straight man to start it with, because I think creating a place for healthy masculinity is fun, and masculinity is something that I like. Turns out, when I'm not a man, it's actually a lot of fun. It's kind of strange that it happened that way, but yeah, find me those places. Book sometime in the next several years, probably. It'll take a while. Oh God, I don't know. Go have fun. Leave me alone.
All right, everybody, go have fun. Thanks for joining me. All right, appreciate you being here. Hey there, folks. Mark Edwards again. Thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it. This was an absolute blast of a conversation to have. I felt really fortunate to get all of these folks together to have it. And I hope to maybe in the future start doing more of these things as time and resources permit. I really like, and I was watching the footage back, and I noticed there are like a lot of moments where I'm like, I want to jump in and like say what I want to say, but having to like restrain myself because the whole point of what I was trying to do here was to get people to talk to each other. And that's good for me. Like, that's a good skill for me to learn, is when to just shut the fuck up and listen to people who who know more about something than I do. So it was just all around a great experience, and I want to once again thank all my wonderful guests, Caitlin, Bellamy, Finn. Thank you so much for coming. I know that Bellamy and Finn both have Patreons and other funding apps. So please definitely go check those out. Go subscribe to both of them on YouTube and Twitter. Go sub to their Patreons. Help them keep making the content that they do. I don't believe that Caitlin has a Patreon or anything like that. If I'm wrong about that, I'll definitely include the note, but I don't think so. But she is, as she mentioned, an author at Liberal Currents, and she does wonderful pieces. In the show notes, you'll find her most recent piece about trans rights as it relates to abortion rights, and it was a wonderful article that everybody should read. So go subscribe to her via that, and also on Twitter. I also have a Patreon that you can subscribe to. There's various ways that you can throw me money if you so choose. For the time being, though, I think I'm more comfortable if you just give money to your local organizing community. So, you know, if you're going to give $5, $10, $20 a month to me, I'd rather it go to your local community orgs relating to abortion rights or trans rights, or, you know, your local LGBTQ center or something like that. Like those those folks need that money more than I do to make the world a better place. So, or to just at a minimum keep their local community safe. So, that would be my suggestion. If you have $5 to burn, is instead of giving it to me on the links that are up here somewhere, you find in that research document someplace you can give money to where it will be actually useful for the cause. If you are not able to do that at all, right? You don't have $5 to spare or $1. I get it. I've been there. I've lived that life. I understand. You can share this content, and it helps me immensely. If you want to help the show without doing the money thing, liking 5 stars anywhere you can like me. Any of that. It's all good. Like, share, comment, hit the bell thing, do the YouTube stuff. Y'all know the deal. Do all the doobly things. And I think I'm spinning my wheels at this point. But yeah, so I'm gonna just cut this. But everybody stay safe. Help your neighbors. Yep. Love you. See you on the next one.